If you ask an American sports fan what the most important piece of land is, they'll probably give you a multitude of answers. Depending on their sport of choice, you'll most likely hear Yankee Stadium, Fenway Park, Madison Square Garden, Augusta, Rose Bowl, Lambeau Field, even the occasional Indy Motor Speedway and Churchill Downs. But I got a different answer. Now I could just straight up tell you my answer, but this project took me months, so I want to walk you through what it was like to discover, at least what I consider, the most important piece of land in American sports history.
Cincinnati go for the three right away.
Down to half a minute. Second and goal. Coleman sets up
Ever since my freshman year, I've been pretty interested in the history of Duke, especially the parts that rarely get mentioned. I did a lot of work digging through early 2000s forums and looking at documents in the Duke archives. So that summer, when I made my first YouTube video talking about the Duke football team in the 2000s, I came across the Wikipedia page for the 1888 Trinity Blue and White football team. Trinity College would eventually become Duke University, so this is essentially the first Duke football team. So if we look at the very first game played by Duke, it's this 16-0 victory against North Carolina. Seems pretty innocuous, but what piqued my interest was the location. Baseball Park in Raleigh. Who calls a baseball park? At the time, I just assumed it was some sort of input error, so I decided to look into it myself. After about 5 minutes of Googling, I saw Devereaux Meadows, a historic baseball park in Raleigh. And although the meadow was created in 1938, 50 years after the football game took place, I assumed that Baseball Park just might have been an unnamed precursor to the Meadows. Feeling like that was good enough, I left it for about 1.5 years until the winter break between 2025 and 2026. I was now a junior and just finished my first semester working for the Duke football team. Now, I'm not sure exactly what I'm allowed to say and not say, so I'm going to play it safe and just say that I figured I should memorize more about the history of the university and the football team. I came across the 1888 page again and once more saw Baseball Park and decided to re-look into it. After over a year since assuming it was just old Devereaux Meadows, something didn't sit right with me. I really couldn't find anything to link those two parks together, so I decided that maybe instead of spending 5 minutes on Google, I should actually spend some time figuring this out. Which basically amounted to 10 minutes of Googling before I got stuck and gave up. Fast forward to the end of the semester during exam prep week. On the evening of April 28th, I was looking into the history of secret societies at Duke when I remembered the alma mater marker behind the chapel. A week prior, I had just used Claude and Chat to help me solve a math problem that I had been working on for years. Since Claude and Chat had evolved to the point of helping me with that math problem, I figured I would ask them about that alma mater stone puzzle, but they just really couldn't make any ground. But knowing that they were still powerful enough to help me with the unanswered math question, I gave it what I knew about the supposed baseball park and asked it to find it. Chat led me to this paper on John Crowell, the president of Trinity College and the man who introduced football to Duke. Right there, in the very front, this published paper clearly stated that the game wasn't held at Baseball Park, but instead the NC State Fairgrounds. A football game at the State Fairgrounds seems a little weird to be true, but consider that a month prior to the Duke-UNC game, North Carolina and Wake Forest played a game that we know was at the fairgrounds. Add on the fact that a couple other sources claimed fairgrounds, including ones from the official Duke archival site. Seems like a pretty close case, right? It's just a classic instance of Wikipedia being wrong, so I'll just go into the page and make it an edit. But something just didn't feel right. If it really was at the fairgrounds, where in the world did this baseball park idea come from? But if it was at Baseball Park, it would make sense that there might be confusion with the North Carolina Wake Forest game that led people to assume wrong. So seeing that the sources for the Duke versus Wake Forest in the same year were old newspaper clippings, I thought that newspapers might show me something that Googling couldn't. And boy was I right. Eventually I came across Digital NC, a website that archived thousands of newspapers from North Carolina in the 1800s and 1900s, which really made this whole thing possible. I was able to search through Raleigh newspapers in 1888, and I was able to confirm that the game did in fact happen at Baseball Park. About 15 minutes later, I also found this paper that called it the Raleigh Baseball Park. Now, this normally would have meant nothing. I mean, we already knew it was a baseball park in Raleigh, but seeing it in all caps made me realize that Baseball Park was the actual name of the park as opposed to just a general descriptor. It also confirmed the fact that this old Duke site was wrong and it wasn't the baseball park in Raleigh, but actually the Raleigh Baseball Park instead. Knowing this, I quickly uncovered a paper that gave us two important pieces of information. It read, "The first game of the second series between the Swiftfoots of this city and the Carolinas of Henderson took place yesterday afternoon at Baseball Park on New Bern Avenue." First, looks like some club named Swiftfoots played at this park. And New Bern Avenue? Yeah, that's a street in Raleigh, it totally exists. I mean, for the first time, we actually have a solid lead. But I don't want to get too excited just yet. I want to confirm that this is the right park and that there aren't any more parks that just so happen to be named Baseball Park. And through all my research, almost all references to Baseball Park were done with the Swiftfoots Club. And even though the current New Bern Avenue doesn't end with an E, I was able to find mentions to current roads that match the location of current New Bern exactly. So there we have it. The baseball park is somewhere on New Bern. But this is where the story starts to run dry. I was hoping to find more about a park on New Bern, like if they mentioned any landmarks near it or any places in relation, or even directions to get to the park. But nothing. Reading these almost felt like listening to an inside joke that everyone knew except for me. Apparently everyone just knew where Baseball Park, so the exact location just never had to be mentioned in the papers. Fine, it's whatever, I'll just find it myself. I fired up Google Maps and started scrolling. Luckily for me, New Bern Avenue really isn't that long. And even luckier is that large portions are in downtown or obvious wooded areas. So within a minute, I found a very promising candidate. This was right off of New Bern, and the fields were easily big enough to host a football game in. I mean, I did it. This has to be it. There's no other large field right on New Bern. I mean, I could even imagine myself driving up to the field knowing that I was on a piece of history. I even went into Street View to see what the drive up would be like. Now hold on a minute. The sign says no trespassing private property. Parks can't be private property though. What's going on? In my excitement, I completely overlooked the pin saying St. David's School Satellite Athletic Fields. And to my disappointment, their website confirms that the complex was created in 2013 and the baseball field in 2017. If I couldn't find it on the map or in the newspapers, is it even on the internet? Is it possible to even find the location? I was tired and I wanted to call it a night, but I knew if I dropped the project now, there's a good chance I wouldn't have this motivation for a while. And even though the St. David's disappointment had really sucked, I'd still found the street name in a couple hours, something I really didn't expect to find that quickly. So I gave myself one more hour to try to make more progress. I went back to scanning baseball fields on New Bern, but most of them were just too small for a football game or too far away from the street to be considered on New Bern. I briefly considered Enloe High School's field, but quickly reasoned that if baseball field was eventually converted into Enloe, it would have been noted somewhere on the internet. But out of the corner of my eye, I spotted a baseball field and a beat-up football field that could just be it. Unlike St. David's, it was open to the public. And Google Earth images from 1993 and 2002 show the baseball diamond in the field. There's even a large portion of trees cleared in the south end that could accommodate a field expansion for football. I was hoping the website of the church right next to it would shed some light on the field, but nothing there. Trinity was a heavily Christian college, so I just convinced myself that playing right next to a church is what John Crowell would have wanted. It really felt like this could be it. I just need just one piece of information that could confirm it. Even just a mention of a church nearby, and I would have considered it a closed case. But Google Maps give it, and Google Maps take it. In a repeat of the St. David's Field, I completely overlooked the pin right next to it that said Wilders Grove Youth Center. I was thoroughly surprised to see a youth group center having a history page, but right there in the first sentence, we see that it was founded in 1950. Now, it was still a possibility that the field was there earlier and the group just took it over, but that kind of brought me back down to earth. Although somewhat close to New Bern, it's still far enough away that a newspaper would say off of New Hope and not necessarily off of New Bern. And probably the most damning of all, it was just too far away from Raleigh. Most older maps of Raleigh just don't reach that far, and there's no way people drove there considering the amount of attendance from Raleigh citizens who probably didn't have cars. Now, my self-imposed hour wasn't quite up, but it was basically too late to find or pursue any other leads. In a last-ditch Hail Mary to find anything, I just went back to Google and typed Raleigh Baseball Park, New Bern Avenue. Right there in front of me, a Raleigh government website that mentions a historical baseball park on New Bern Avenue. And it felt like there was no doubts with this one. A field that stood until the 40s right on New Bern? Unlike the other two fields, like I said, this one just felt right. I had no doubt in my mind this was it. This unassuming gas station and collections of housing was where this historic baseball park used to be, the corner of New Bern and Tarboro. Before I went to sleep though, I wanted to use my last bits of motivation to get some more information. So I went back to the Crowell paper, the one that kind of kicked this whole thing off, and tried to see if I could contact the author. I wanted to ask Jim Sumner why he said the state fairgrounds in the first place. Now this is in no way, shape, or form an attack on Sumner. I want to make that very clear. He's an incredible Duke historian and a great storyteller. And it was obvious to me that his reason for misinformation was due to the fact that this paper was published in 1990. He just simply didn't have the same resources we did today. So I found his Substack and messaged him. Last thing I did was email Troy Burton about seeing where they got that quote from the New Bern Markers page. Considering he was a historic resources and museum program administrator for Raleigh, I figured he could answer, or at least set me on the direction to the answer. With that, I finally closed my laptop and headed to bed, knowing that the case was finally closed. But if you look at the length of this video, you can see that the video isn't really close to being done. That's because this case wasn't close to being done yet. After that day, I ended up telling my friends and family about it, but honestly I really couldn't dwell on it for too long because I had to lock in for my exams. I finished my exams and came back home planning to get some much needed rest. On the evening of May 7th, I was thinking about emailing one of the Duke archivalists about Baseball Park, since Sumner and Burton hadn't responded yet. So I went into my Google Docs I had been keeping as documentation as a refresher and pulled up the New Bern Markers page. And to my horror, I realized that the first sentence implies that the field was only there in the 30s and 40s, and not beforehand. In the moment, I was so excited at finding the field that I had interpreted as the field being demolished in the 30s or 40s, even though the next sentence clearly states it was the 40s. I jumped the gun and assumed I had solved the case without really getting proof. And just like that, case reopened. I figured that since all my leads came from the newspapers, I must have overlooked something in the papers that could help me. But even with new eyes, I just couldn't make any ground. There were thousands of papers, but I was confident I had read every mention of Baseball Park in Raleigh of 1888. There was just nothing left to squeeze out of Baseball Park or New Bern Avenue. Seeing the city plan of Raleigh at the top of the New Bern website inspired me to maybe see if I could find the park using historical maps. Armed with an NC Live account and a whole bunch of motivation, I scanned through all the maps I could find. Problem was that most maps started right before hitting that intersection of New Bern and Tarboro. And the ones I could find that extended that far just didn't show the park. I had no choice but to conclude that my escapade in April just led me to a dead end. I'd felt pretty awful that I had told people this big claim that I had discovered this location, all for it to be wrong. Now I could make this right by actually finding it and confirming it once and for all, but I really had no idea where to go. Remember, that New Bern website was a last-ditch Hail Mary to find anything. Without that, I had no leads to follow. So I went back to my document and found the only other path I really hadn't explored yet. Swiftfoot. It's true I'd used Swiftfoot to confirm that I was searching for the right park, but I didn't look at much else simply because Googling Swiftfoot's baseball club or Swiftfoot's Raleigh didn't return anything. But I didn't have any other option, so Swiftfoot's it was. Through this whole search, I told you about the papers of use, but I left out so many papers I had to go through that just ended up being duds. The vast majority of time in this project was spent reading newspapers that gave me absolutely nothing. I expanded my search to a couple years beforehand and read every mention of the Swiftfoots. For hours, I'd find mentions of a park to only realize that they were referring to a different park, not the one on New Bern. Now, just because the papers weren't useful doesn't mean they weren't entertaining as hell though. They would hold parades and festivities for baseball teams coming into town, which was honestly pretty wild considering this was an amateur league in the Triangle and that these teams played pretty frequently. But my favorite part was that one time, the Swiftfoots and the Henderson Ball Club played in a winner-take-all Game 3 of a series that was declared a Swiftfoot victory by both parties, with Henderson awarding the Swiftfoots a trophy for their win. But a couple weeks later, Henderson would officially protest the win due to an incorrect ref call. They protested the win weeks after literally gifting them a trophy for winning. It was a whole different time indeed. As fun as reading that was, there was not one mention of a baseball park, so it was really all in vain. But after stopping to actually think about it for a second, I realized I had been in the wrong time period altogether. Remember this paper that gave us the official name of the park? We can see that it stated baseball park was one of the latest things in Raleigh, meaning that if we wanted to find more about it in relation to the Swiftfoots, we would have to look around July 19th, 1884. I was just a couple months too early. On July 12th, 1884, a week before that previous article, the News and Observer would write, "The Raleigh Baseball and Athletics Association have prepared handsome grounds on New Bern Avenue between Camp Russell and Oakwood Cemetery, and hereafter all match games will be played there. The Swiftfoot plays the Carolina Club of Henderson at the new grounds here." Oh my god, we finally have something to go off of. If this is the Swiftfoot's baseball park they play out of from now on, we know it's the same one that the Duke game was played on. And Oakwood Cemetery was right next to the St. Augustine School, so that leaves just finding this Camp Russell. Luckily, the history of Camp Russell is pretty well documented, so we know that it eventually turned into Pettigrew Hospital, a hospital that's now a DMV. A DMV that's right across a gas station, and a gas station on the corner of New Bern and Tarboro. Now, this was no confirmation that the website was correct. After all, this corner technically wasn't between the cemetery and camp, more like alongside the camp. But there was just no way this could have been a coincidence. But I had been confident so many times before, and every time I had jumped the gun, so I was determined to learn from my mistakes. Continuing for hours with the newspaper route didn't show much, so if I wanted confirmation, I needed to get it somewhere else. And in an exact repeat of almost a week earlier, the miracle came through a simple Google search. I just looked up historical maps of Raleigh and clicked on the first link of a map of Raleigh in 1910, and on the corner of New Bern and Tarboro, right next to the Soldiers' Home. Below the Oakwood Cemetery, right where the modern day houses and gas stations reside, is Baseball Park. Misspelled or not, this was the confirmation we needed all this time. I had done it. I knew where Baseball Park was, and this time for real. Now, I've got to come clean. There's something I've been withholding from you this entire time. If you were attentive enough, you could have actually spotted it multiple times throughout this video. Yes, this is the start of the Duke-Carolina rivalry, but this game has an even larger significance. Wake and North Carolina played a football game a month prior, but by all accounts this game was more similar to rugby than modern football. This 1888 game was the first game in the South played with scientific rules, the same rules played up north that eventually morphed into what we now consider football. And you don't need me to tell you how important football is in the South. So yeah, Yankee Field, MSG, Augusta, and all the rest are very, very important when it comes to American sports. But if you ask me, across from the double cookouts on New Bern Avenue and Tarboro Street, you'll find some gas stations and houses that make up the most important piece of land in American sports history.